Welcome to Name of Action, where we help you break down challenging passages in Shakespeare and bring them to life. Few dramatic characters are as iconic as Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and even fewer are so closely identified with a dovetailed set of monologues. Let's take a look at Juliet's contribution to the two soliloquies most associated with these star-crossed lovers. It's hard to believe that the female protagonist of one of Shakespeare's most recognizable tragedies is not yet even 14 years old. Immediately, this has the audience wondering if this is an appropriate main character for a love story. Juliet is an inexperienced, sheltered young girl who, as the play opens, is wholly governed by her parents. While her parents seem at odds with how quickly Juliet is to marry the good-looking, politically well-connected, and rich County Paris, Juliet is decidedly naive. She hasn't thought about love or marriage, and tentatively agrees to proceed with men only as far as her parents expressly allow. And yet, within a week, Juliet will not just think of marriage, she will find love, marry hastily, fall into the middle of an inter-family feud that's turned Verona into a battlefield, suffer heartbreak, take desperate measures to keep her love alive, see her love dead at her feet, and finally, take her own life. She's got a lot of growing up to do and little time to do it. In many ways, therefore, it's appropriate that Juliet's first reaction to love is worry. Her age and environment all act against her. Her worry is the impetus of this soliloquy and forms its core. But let's take a moment to recognize what this reaction might also signify. The ages of the lovers, along with the shocking speed with which this love affair develops, challenges audience and readers to accept Romeo and Juliet as an ideal romantic tragedy. If Shakespeare overtly makes Juliet's age and inexperience topics of concern, can he also intend his play to be an ideal expression of doomed love? Or is there some satire hidden here? The immediate challenge for an actress is how to make Juliet's performance sincere and still naive. If her response to love is indeed part of a larger satire, on the other hand, the director must still figure out how to make the irony clear. To do Juliet's performance justice, we must first take a look at the events and dialogues that have her fretting on a balcony. From the play's very first scene, it's clear that both Romeo and Juliet are detached from the ancient and pointless feud that's turned the Italian city of Verona into a battleground. As a woman, Juliet is far from the center of this fray because, as the servants observe, the feud is between our masters and their men. She's only aware of the violence with which the feud is pursued. Romeo, too, is unattached to this quarrel. Ironically, his love for Rosaline has left him distracted from the hate that should call him to fight. The first we hear of Juliet is when old Capulet, her father, is entertaining a young man's request to seek Juliet as a bride. He warns Paris, who is advantageously related to Prince Aeschylus, ruler of Verona, that Juliet is far too young to marry. Her consent, Capulet urges, is what should be sought at this point. Capulet encourages Paris to meet and woo Juliet at a party that night. In the next scene, Lady Capulet, who seems far more inclined to see Juliet marry quickly, prepares her daughter for the meeting with Paris. Juxtaposed with her husband's sensibility, Lady Capulet's haste is transparently ill-advised. Over and over, Shakespeare draws our attention to Juliet's young age and recent infancy. Juliet's naivete is directly emphasized by her admission that marriage is an honor that I dream not of. Upon her mother's command, however, Juliet, who seems ever the dutiful daughter, agrees to consider marriage. Juliet adds only that, "No more deep will I endart mine eye, than your consent gives strength to make it fly." The audience might find themselves smiling at the thought of a teenager agreeing only to love as strongly as their parents allow. Certainly, we're meant to be amused by the irony that both of the title lovers are bound to other affairs at the opening of the play. At the Capulet party that night, Juliet never meets Paris. Instead, we witness her meeting Romeo. There to meet Rosaline, Romeo is stunned by his first glimpse of Juliet. In a rapture, he forgets Rosaline and assaults Juliet with poetic flatteries. Boldly taking her by the hand, the smooth-talking Romeo succeeds in getting not one, but two quick kisses from her. Juliet succumbs quickly to the eloquence of this gallant youth who compares her to a saint and a shrine at which he now finds himself worshiping. Within moments of the meeting, however, his identity is revealed to Juliet. Upon hearing that her new obsession is the heir of the Montagues, Juliet is dashed. My only love sprung from my only hate? Too early seen unknown and known too late. Prodigious birth of love it is to me that I must love a loathed enemy. As Act 2 opens, the narrator comes on stage to remind us that the feud should make this love impossible. The narrator also plants a seed of doubt in the authenticity of the affair, calling Romeo bewitched by the charm of looks. Right before Juliet's soliloquy, Romeo has his famous, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks?" soliloquy. He too is smitten and rhapsodizes about her beauty in terms very much like the love poetry of the day. But he's not serenading Juliet. Rather, he's hiding in her garden like a peeping Tom seeking to catch sight of her. Though his soliloquy stands as a yardstick for lovers to this day, we have to wonder if his exaggerated description of Juliet is all that sincere. How much faith can we put into the somewhat cliché, arguably false, yet beautiful comparisons made by one who seems to us a stalker? Are we invited to be impressed by the intensity of Romeo's love or the silliness of his infatuation? On one hand, it's clear that Romeo has fallen in love with Juliet's appearance. This alone might get a modern audience to distrust any deeper romantic significance to Romeo's lines. On the other hand, love at first sight, the endartment of the eye that Juliet referred to in Act 1, was widely held to be a real and devastatingly powerful force at the time. So, the audience is left to make up its own mind how seriously to take Romeo's newfound passion. Our perception of Romeo's soliloquy will shade our appreciation of Juliet's lines. They're that closely linked. In the midst of Romeo's rapture, Juliet exclaims, "Hi me," silencing Romeo, who begins eavesdropping on Juliet's thoughts, spoken aloud. One thing is clearly missing in Romeo's soliloquy. He makes no mention of any obstacle connected with Juliet's identity. He focuses solely on his all-consuming love for her. The audience is now poised to treat Juliet as either a mirror of the passionate Romeo or as his foil. So what are our expectations for this soliloquy? Many of us might want to hear Juliet proclaim her love for Romeo with just as much passion and perhaps just as much romantic poetry as Romeo has just proclaimed for her. However, we know that Juliet is new to this kind of experience. She's like a babe in the woods. So how should her response be different from his? She certainly should be more surprised, but will she be as infatuated as he is? The actor could choose to emphasize her naivete or make her seem wiser than her male counterpart. Either way, this is Shakespeare's first real chance to characterize his female lead. To get to the bottom of these questions, we'll divide the soliloquy into three parts: the problem, the exposition, and the resolution, or more simply, the beginning, the middle, and the end.
Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?
Wherefore art thou, Romeo? It's something of a schoolteacher's joke to point out that Juliet is not asking where Romeo is. Wherefore is a way of saying why, or for what reason. But where does that leave us? It's clear that Juliet doesn't know Romeo is nearby hiding, but she uses the second person pronoun thou. Therefore, by asking why Romeo is Romeo, Juliet's haggling with a make-believe Romeo about his name. She pretends that he's right there in front of her. It's the great irony of this pair of soliloquies that both Romeo and Juliet are on stage and address each other, but only while speaking to themselves.
Deny thy father and refuse thy name. Or if thou wilt not, be but sworn, my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet.
If Romeo denies his father and name, he then, it seems, is lovable. And if he won't give up his name, she'll give up hers. It's an odd way to profess one's love. Is she upset that she's fallen in love with the wrong person, as she seemed to say in Act 1? She came to know his identity too late to stop herself? Or rather, is she worried that the person she already hopelessly loves simply has the wrong name, Romeo Montague? In either case, we quickly realize that Juliet is not giving in to the same infatuation that's inspired Romeo to speak. Rather, she's afraid and is trying to seek a way out of a dilemma. Romeo is a Montague and therefore simply can't be a love between two enemies. Her initial answer to the dilemma is to desire that Romeo give up his last name and father and be hers. Or she says, be sworn, my love, and she will do so for him. Is her initial recognition of the problem evidence that Juliet is wiser and more realistic than Romeo? She seems to realize that this love will require great sacrifice. Is she therefore less naive than he? And what does she mean by sworn, my love? Since she refers to giving up her last name, is she already talking of marriage? Let's look at how the soliloquy progresses. In the next lines, Juliet is still focused on the problem of the feud.
'Tis but thy name that is mine enemy.
When Juliet observes that Romeo himself is not an enemy, only his name, she may be revealing the real tragedy of this play. The war between the two families is pointless. There seems to be no other substance to the animosity but names. Perhaps Juliet is so naive that she doesn't know why the feud is so strong. If so, Prince Aeschylus, the law personified, seems to share Juliet's lack of insight. In Act 1, he mocks the two families for having an ancient and cankered feud consisting of fights bred by an airy word. Juliet may be so wise as to recognize the real irony of the situation for us.
Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name! What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title.
A name is not a real thing. It isn't like a body part, she says. It doesn't create who we are, and a rose can be perfect no matter what name it's given, as can Romeo. A modern audience finds itself attracted to her reasoning. A name is just a symbol. The wonder of a thing is the thing itself. We can't help but want to agree. No wiser words have ever been said. If this name alone stops this love affair, then something very wrong has happened. But this play is not modern. A 16th century audience certainly could have told her what's in a name: a person's honor, reputation, political power, career, and social rank were all connected to his or her name in the virtual caste system that existed all across Europe. Moreover, as we see during this play, a person's protection under the law and from the law seems closely bound to his or her name as well. As much as we might want to side with Juliet's wisdom, Shakespeare may have wanted us to see it for unparalleled cluelessness. And before we go on, look at what Juliet prefers over a name: hands, feet, arms, faces. This is the perfection that Romeo owns or owes without his name. On one hand, she may be a foil to Romeo because she focuses on the deeper problems within the love affair, but on the other hand, she seems to share the same shallow considerations when it comes to what she loves about him. This may lend weight to seeing Juliet's wisdom more as naivete. Juliet comes to a conclusion that, once she says it, gets Romeo so excited he reveals himself to her.
Romeo, doff thy name, and for thy name, which is no part of thee, take all myself.
Does Juliet really believe she has a solution and that Romeo will give up his name for her? Does she know how unlikely this is? On one hand, we can imagine that she's just so naive she actually believes that she's come up with a resolution to her dilemma. In her mind, they can and will give up their names and live happily ever after. Or is she merely dreaming, as a child might, wishing for what she knows she cannot have? Maybe she's resentful about how impossible the situation seems to be, and so chooses the fantasy over the reality. After Romeo interrupts, observe her reaction once she sees him there in the dialogue that follows. Does she still worry about the impossibility of this affair? Or has she truly resolved to go forward with her concluding thought, to abandon their families and be sworn each other's love? Juliet's obsession with Romeo's name, and the problem of names in general, shows that she's far more afraid of the implications of her newfound love than Romeo is. This, if nothing else, might suggest her as a foil for Romeo's head-over-heels fall into love. 4 times during the first lines of the ensuing dialogue, Juliet questions, even chides Romeo for coming this far within the boundaries of his enemy, Juliet's kinsman. She pleads, "If they do see thee, they will murder thee." Romeo, still as heedless as ever, replies, "Alack, there lies more peril in thine eye than 20 of their swords. Look thou but sweet, and I am proof against their enmity." In short, if she treats him as an enemy, then he will die by her rejecting him. But if she looks on him kindly, he doesn't care what threat her kinsmen pose. This seems to suggest that Juliet is a bit more realistic about this love affair than her male counterpart. Therefore, her objective in this soliloquy, to voice her concern over the obstacles posed by the feud, may be a mark of wisdom. Her wisdom shouldn't be overplayed. For all her worry, she doesn't seem to recognize the danger of her answer to their problems. Romeo seeks the exchange of love oaths, and we already know how seriously he takes those. It's Juliet who demands more. By the end of the act, she prompts Romeo to propose to her. Tellingly, at the end of this soliloquy, when she says, "Take all of myself," she may mean taking, as in, "Do you take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife?" Her motives, therefore, may not be so wise after all. Considering this play has 2 title characters, we might assume this first pair of soliloquies is meant to give insight into what makes these 2 characters distinct. Romeo is more inclined to listen to his emotions and follow his instincts, whereas Juliet is more inclined to worry and listen to reason or her fears. Or perhaps they're only 2 different sides to the same coin. Both images of young, tragically rash lovers who, at least at this point in the play, seem a bit shallow. Both fail to see that some obstacles can't simply be dodged, as Juliet imagines, or ignored, as Romeo does. Whether Romeo initially seeks love and Juliet marriage is really rather moot. A short dialogue later, they both agree that marriage is the best solution. Yet all the while, we know that this love affair is star-crossed. Juliet's fears are rational, Romeo's lack of concern naive. This will end poorly. As we listen to first Romeo and then Juliet's soliloquy, we can't help but recognize that rushing into either a romantic affair or a fairy tale marriage without consideration is a recipe for doom. If this is the case, treating Juliet as a foil for Romeo might get in the way of us seeing how much they are alike. This soliloquy may, however, contain a greater implication. Perhaps the rash and unrealistic resolution Juliet settles on in this monologue points to the greater senselessness of the feud that inspires it. If this pointless feud had not intervened or had ended long ago as it should have, then these 2 lovers would not be fatally divided by mere names. As such, perhaps this soliloquy is Shakespeare's attempt at satirizing the profound silliness of adult feuds. If Juliet, like Romeo, seems naive and unwise in pursuing this new love, then the parents who pursue their old hatred with as much intensity are no less foolish. If a love bred by a first glance and a few airy words seems shallow, can't be any shallower than hate bred on airy words alone. Can you find other evidence in this play that this Soliloquy is part of a larger satire that aims at the tragedy of the two households. Remember, when the two families finally come together, only after they've destroyed the union and lives of their hapless children, both are without an heir and therefore doomed as well. Thank you for joining us at nameofaction.com, where we bring Shakespeare to life.